Thank you, Chairman Paulson. I agree with you that it's useful to look at the Republican tax law's impacts on our economy, on working families, and our nation's economic position. I suspect we may come to some different conclusions. At best, the Republican tax bill was a massive missed opportunity, squandering $1.9 trillion on tax breaks for those who didn't need them at a time when our nation could least afford it. The bill does little to help working families. Instead, it worsens inequality and burdens the next generation with trillions in additional debt, which could jeopardize vital programs and services that families count on. At a basic level, the law simply hasn't lived up to Republican promises. The White House and our Republican colleagues promised families a $4,000 a year increase in income. That simply hasn't happened. In fact, hourly wages adjusted, which you can see in this chart here, adjusted for inflation, are actually going down, not up. And as you can see in the chart on wage growth, the average hourly wage for production and non-supervisory workers, our best measure of the typical worker's take-home pay, was lower in July of 2018 than in July of 2017 after adjusting for inflation. In other words, wages simply aren't keeping pace with the cost of living. That means it's harder for a typical family to buy groceries, to pay rent, to put gas in the tank. After decades of wage stagnation, where the median workers' wages have grown by 6.1% over the last 38 years, people need a real raise, not empty promises. The reality is that Republican tax bill is doing exactly what virtually all mainstream economists and Democrats said it would do. It is delivering the vast majority of its benefits to large corporations and wealthy individuals, while leaving working Americans behind. Stock buybacks are now at record highs, with Goldman Sachs projecting that they will reach $1 trillion by the end of the year. While buybacks benefit company executives and other wealthy shareholders and investors, they do nothing for half of all Americans who own no stock. And since foreign investors own 35% of U.S. stocks, much of the benefits of these buybacks are actually flowing overseas. It's important to remember that each dollar spent on buybacks is a dollar not spent on investing in factories or plants, in training or boosting workers' wages. We could have gone a different direction. My Republican colleagues could have joined with Democrats to craft deficit-neutral, pro-growth tax reform. But by adding $1.9 trillion to the national debt, the tax law gives Republicans their latest justification to target Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Just last month, Republican Representative Steve Stivers, the chair of the NRCC, expressed support for turning Medicare into a voucher program. Republicans are again pushing to cut health care coverage that families receive through Medicaid and go after Medicare and Social Security, which seniors and their families count on. In my state, more than half of New Mexicans depend on these three programs and the Affordable Care Act to help with health care and living expenses. Cuts to these programs would have devastating consequences for families who have seen little to no benefit from the tax cuts. Recent economic projections remind us that any growth bump from a Republican tax cut will be short-lived. So Republicans will try to take our eyes elsewhere. Republicans will point to the second quarter GDP growth, but will neglect to mention that we have hit higher levels multiple times in this recovery, or that long-term projections remain unchanged. In fact, economists at the San Francisco Fed recently projected that the tax cuts could have zero impact to growth due to the poor timing of the law. They'll talk about this year's job growth, but fail to acknowledge that 2018 and 2017 look basically the same as 2016 and 2015. In fact, as this chart on job growth shows, the economy is adding fewer jobs per month since President Trump took over. Now, Republicans want to make permanent the temporary provisions of the bill to dole out a second helping of tax breaks. But doing so would deliver two-thirds of the benefits to the wealthiest 20% and add nearly $800 billion more to the debt by 2028. The Republican tax law was the wrong medicine at the wrong time. The solution is not to take more of it. I want to thank each of our witnesses here today for your testimony, and I look forward to a very spirited discussion.